today. Thank you so much for coming out to the lecture, or the Brain Trust Brown Bag Lunch Lecture, which we have once a month on the third Wednesday. It is at noon at lunchtime, so you're welcome always to come in, bring your lunch, eat while you're getting a lecture. It's always interesting. We do different lectures every month as well. This one kind of came up, not accidentally, but we have done this lecture before on election cakes, but this particular season seems very appropriate. And then I was at the El Paso Community College one day, and I met Marco Covarrubias, excuse me, sir, and I invited him to come to this lecture, and he can give you some more insight. He's from the county, El Paso County. He is the training coordinator supervisor. So he will come up after me. We also have Joseph Longo, one of El Paso's historians, and also following up will be Eva Ross. She's a colleague, one of our volunteers here, and also very, very knowledgeable. And she shares her knowledge with us always. She'll be bringing it down, or bringing it up with Hope Rising. I know she's still working upstairs. Okay, I wish she would come down. So welcome everybody. Today we're talking about the election cake. Have you ever heard of an election cake? Never? Okay. The tradition began with the Puritans, and unfortunately it ended around 1900, turn of the century. The first time election cake was made was in 1771. So this history of election cakes goes way, way back. The first recipe in a cookbook was Amelia Simmons' cookbook, American Cookery, published in 1796. And then I know she did a second edition as well with even more recipes for election cake. So perusing social media shows we do not have cake on our minds for the upcoming election in 48 days. I would like to see this come back. If you could, every election, no matter how small, how big, let's meet here and have election cake. Now I said before, we have lectured on this subject, and a lot of people didn't really understand what it was or the importance of it. Actually, October the 5th, our cooking class is going to be an authentic election cake. It won't be as big as usual, but we have to at least get something because they're not very good. Not really consensus. But back then in the 1700s, 1800s, men didn't really care. They just needed cake in their hands. So Jamestown in 1607, as soon as the English immigrants landed, what do you think they did? Probably prayed, thank God we're here, but they held an election. A president was elected that very day by 6 men, less than 6% of the population. I think there was under 100 people that landed. Derived from English practice and refined by American experience, from these 6 men evolved our belief in the ballot and our ideas about who is entitled to cast one. So that one day really changed the course of history. Although there had been other democracies throughout the world, Greece, maybe the indigenous, but it was here, evidence of democracy that day in Jamestown. Now every election after that had what they called a muster cake. It was a grand cake, or this grand cake was the center of all things political. This cake was on everyone's mind before and even after the next election. It was so good, they said, well, we're going to come back next year and the next year, and it brought the whole town. This cake brought everyone to town to vote and to share the cake. Sometimes these cakes weighed as much as 12 pounds. I do have a recipe from the Suffragette Cookbook from the 1898, and it's got one election cake recipe with a lot of stuff. Now, what these cakes did, they were called muster cakes. They would muster up the community or rallied them. All able-bodied men ages 16 to 60 would be mustered for military practice, to watch drills, to socialize, to drink alcohol together, to vote, and of course, eat cake. At this time, votes were mainly for town leaders and spokesmen. We didn't have a president elected until April 6, 1789, and you know who that was. He had also participated in many election days prior, and enjoyed coming to town for those. Let's see. Election cakes were also called Hartford cakes. This would have been in Connecticut. Now, every colony probably most likely had their own election festivities. But there is a record in 1771. Ezekiel Williams was reimbursed 3 British pounds for the cost of the ingredients to make his election cake. It was a very big deal. Sometimes these women were given $1,000 back then. That was a lot of money. I wonder if they bought land. Now, most definitely, there were many election cakes there on a special day, especially when George Washington was elected. What you don't know maybe is that at the end of election day, I mean, you were campaigning like they do today, but on election day, if you won, you took all the men out that night. So, let's see, after the American Revolution, the muster cake was then called the election cake. Now it was a specialty food, fit for a special occasion. Over time, there were favorite cakes, and of course, many received compensation, but it was more like maybe a cake contest, but more than that. The election day was as revered as a holiday as Thanksgiving Day. It came in second only to Thanksgiving. And it was a holiday when only a few elite white men, property-owning white men, were privileged to vote. So women didn't have this privilege to vote, but they saw the opportunity to participate in the election celebration by preparing these cakes. So they had a big part of it. More than they realized and more than we know. But I would imagine they had it. With the liquor that was put in the cake, George Washington for the win, perhaps. So it is a very important cake. The election cake became the first food strongly associated with American politics. What made it more unique and important was the way it did provide women with an opportunity to express their commitment to their new country. Through the production of election cakes, also called independence cakes, Franklin gingerbread, and democratic tea cakes, women did project their influence into the public and helped ingrain patriotism into our national culture. So these cakes took days to prepare. Basically, it was a sourdough fruit cake laced with whiskey or brandy. Not this one. This one is it was a more recent, actually it was Fanny Farmer from her cookbook, Boston Cooking School cookbook in 1911, or originally 1896. So this is a little bit different, but it's the same recipe. Let's see. So the cakes took flour, 10 pounds of butter, 14 pounds of sugar, lots of brandy, raisins, and spices. So the importance of the election cake should not be trivialized. But today, so many being disenfranchised with our election process, but it's time to remember what was long fought for. Everyone's right to vote. And as a free and democratic country, America is worth our vote and worth the time it takes to bake a cake. So let's exercise your right, your civic duty, and let's share some election cake today. Mr. Covarrubias, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. That was great. And thank you guys for having us today here at the Dolphin Home. So yeah, I met Ms. Garza at a resource fair, right, for one of our elected officials, and she asked me to be here. And I love history, I love elections. Obviously, I work at the elections department. So election history is pretty much right up my alley, right? So I'm thrilled to be here, and when she invited, my boss just loves when we do outreach. So I always volunteer to leave the office for a few hours. It's always a good time. So I'm here to talk to you guys, and you covered elections history briefly, but it's important to know that yes, back then, when elections first began in this country, they were limited to rich property holders, white men, Christian white men, right? So we've come a long way since, right? Seneca Falls, obviously the Voting Rights Act, and all kinds of things in between. So now, elections, even though we've come a long way, they've never been more accessible. They've never been easier, even to register to vote, to update our information. Everything is literally a few clicks away, right? So I came here today not only to listen in on the other speakers, but to let you guys know how easy it is, how accessible it is, and to empower you guys with the information that you need, the resources you need in order to go cast your vote here in the next few months, right? So I want you guys to know about key dates. October 7th is the last day to register to vote, and also to update your information, right? So when we do voter drives, we do a pretty good job of registering voters here in the county, but when I ask people, are you registered to vote? Yes, I am. Well, have you moved lately? And that's when maybe a light bulb goes off and says, yes, I actually have moved, or maybe I got married, changed my name, etc., right? So it is the time to do that now. You have until October 7th to update your information. The other thing is October 21st is the beginning of early voting, right? And it expands from October 21st to November 1st. And there's, this county is 1,000 miles wide, 1,015 miles wide. And we have 33 early voting locations throughout the county. And I guarantee there's one near your home, near your residence, even near your place of employment, right? So that you could vote. And also for election day, on November 5th, we have 116 county-wide vote centers. So what that means is now you can vote anywhere, right? You don't have to be limited to your precinct or your place of residence to vote. You can vote anywhere. So that's one of the most convenient, like I said, now it wasn't always that easy, but now it is, right? So for early voting locations and times, they do kind of vary depending on each location. And something really cool that we're doing for this particular election is something called express curbside voting. So for folks that qualify, 65 years of age or older, people with a disability, people who otherwise would maybe have the potential to get hurt if they were to get off, maybe people that can't stand for too long, they can vote right from the vehicle. So there's going to be, every single location is curbside, but there's 5, and they're each in each part of the county. Shouts out Solana on the west side, Marty Robbins in the east side, Arlington Park Shelter in the northeast, Hilos de Plata Senior Center in the Lower Valley, and then also Agua Dulce Community Center in Horizon. For those, there'll be express curbside. So people are already going to be outside with tents, plenty of signage for you to know that it's curbside. You pull up and it's kind of like Chick-fil-A, I would say, right? Somebody's there with an iPad and they qualify you, they give you your ballot, you make your selections, and then there'll be a drop box right there, a ballot box for you to cast your ballot right there outside. You don't even have to get out of your vehicle, right? So that's something pretty cool that we're doing For this election, we had tried it during the 2020 election, during the COVID, and people liked it, and it kind of brought turn up a little bit, so we're excited to do that again. And then we're also doing it for election day. For election day, it is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. state law. So those hours are always going to be the same. And for early voting is when we kind of switch the hours a little bit. Some will be open as late as 9 p.m. Some others will close at 5. But I guarantee you there's one near you, right? So one thing that has changed for this election, and this is particularly for the voters that maybe voted last presidential 2020, some things have changed. There's no longer any straight ticket voting, right? Before you used to be able to click and it populated every single candidate that's for a particular party. That's done away with. Now you do have to go through each race and then cast your ballot for each preferred candidate, right? So that's something I wanted you guys to be aware that it has changed. Another thing is we have new curbside machines. So for those folks that vote curbside, they'll see a new machine out there, right? So I won't get into the ballot itself, right? Because that's for you to do your own research, right? But there are plenty of races, city, county, state, federal, and there's even some propositions, right? So I would encourage you guys to visit our website, UP County Votes. It's a brand new revamped website. So you'll be able to see your personalized ballot there. Because even though the ballot is long, that doesn't mean yours will be long, right? Your ballot applies only to your place of residence, right? So even if Horizon is having elections, but you live out in Anthony, well, you won't see the Horizon election, right? So we want you guys to remember, if you remember nothing else from my presentation, I want you guys to come away with the 3 R's, right? Which is something we've been talking about as I do these presentations. Register to vote, right? Research the candidates and the propositions, the ballot itself, and then remember to vote. Remember the dates, October 21st through November 1st, and then remember the type of ID that you need to take, remember the place you're gonna go vote at, and then check the times, right? So in recent elections, we now see that half of the people vote during early voting, and then half vote during election day. So early voting is much more convenient, much more flexible for you. It's not just one day, it is a period of 10 days, right? So take advantage of early voting if you want, but you certainly have the choice. And we see that a lot with our older voters. They like to vote during election day. That's the way they've been doing it, that's the way they want to keep doing it, and that's fine. You have that choice. And then we see the trend for younger folks that they like to vote during early voting. We don't want to stand in line, so that's kind of the thing. And also expect lines, right? There's our turnout usually during, off-year elections, and people always ask, well, what do you do the rest of the year? They think that we only show up the day before election day and then we're done the day after, but no, during this off-year elections, we see turnout pretty low in our county, and it's something we're constantly working on. But during elections, we do see about 50%, and we're expecting hopefully around 60% for this election. Last presidential was 47, and then, the previous one in 2016 was 47, and then we cracked the 50% for 2020. So we're expecting to be hopefully an increase for this upcoming election, right? So there's going to be a runoff, I'm sure, because there's quite a few people running for mayor, so there'll be a runoff, and that'll be December 14th. So we want you guys to stay engaged, not just for the presidential and then we're done. No, there's always the next election, right? And I tell that to young people all the time, because they're interested in this election, they should, it's important, but there's always the next election. We want to create a culture of habitual voters, right? People that are constantly engaged, civically engaged. So that's kind of like the what's relevant to this election. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything election related. Like I said, I don't want to get into the ballot itself.
I want to know, the tabulation is done electronically now, but all the machines ultimately have to come back to the courthouse, is what I think.
So none of the machines are connected to the internet, so there's no electronic tabulation, but each machine, when you cast your vote, has a flash drive. That flash drive is removed and then physically brought to our central county station, which is our courthouse downtown, and that's where we create that tabulation.
Where is Command Central in the courthouse on election day of presidential?
Third floor, suite 314. We have all the machines there, and that's where the tabulation is made. So even if we have 116 vote centers, each individual presiding judge has to physically bring 2 flash drives to our office. One has the curbside voting, and then the other one has the voting that took place inside. And then, you know, every hour on the hour, we try to tabulate the people that brought it in during the previous hour, and then so on and so forth until every last one is brought in. There's been some cases where they forget, right? And then we make them go back. By law, we have to have that flash drive with us at the office. So that's how we tally up results at the end of the night. And not only the public wants the result, but the candidates are already calling and they want their results as well, as you can imagine. But it does take us well into the night to bring all those 116 judges into the office. We do it in the parking lot. They pull up, we open their vehicle, remove all the election materials, and then they're on the way. So it's done. Yes.
You brought us some forms so that we can renew our registration or register if it's the first time. Do we hand those off to you or put those in a postal box? Can you talk to us about submitting that?
If you guys take an application, whether to become registered for the first time or to update your information, you guys need to put it in the mailbox, or you could physically take it to our office, you know, county courthouse. But yeah, they cannot accept them back from you. You have to drop those in at the mailbox. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned getting married or moving as changes to your registration status. Are there other ones that we should be aware of?
That's pretty much the main ones. People move all the time, right? I know I moved a while when I was in college, whether I had a dorm or a roommate or something, or moved back to my mom's house. And our last priority was updating my voter registration, right? But it wasn't until I was reminded that on section 1 of the application, it says new applicant, change of address, or replacement card, you know, that certificate that we send out. So you would check the second one and then mail it in. And then 30 days later, you get that certificate. And one thing I didn't mention was if anybody's interested in voting by mail, there are some requirements, right? 65 years of age or older, disability. If you are pregnant and going to give birth 2 weeks prior or 2 weeks after election, you qualify. And also if you're going to be out of the county, right? Some folks are out of the county for that time period, so they will qualify to vote by mail. There's a separate process. You have to, by state law, you have to fill out an application to ballot by mail. We have to have it in written form, but then you can also vote by mail. The deadline for that is October 25th. So we will need to have that application in by the 25th, and then you get your ballot by mail mailed, and then you can vote that way. But you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. My husband and I, we were going over what constitutes an ID.
Yes.
And we being from California, I don't know, what Texas law is, whether you have to have a picture or not
Yeah.
to
So
prove your identity.
that's a great question. So there are 7 acceptable IDs that the state of Texas accepts. 4 are issued by DPS, which is either a license or a personal ID, and then the other one is a license to carry because Texas, and then the other one is an election ID certificate, and that's limited to people that maybe don't have a home or a homeless population. They're able to cast a vote without having a permanent residence address. So those are very limited. Those are 4, right? And they're issued by DPS, and then the last 3 are issued by the federal government. So it'll be your passport, military ID with picture, and then the other one is a naturalization, like a birth certificate, but it has to have a picture on it.
So I guess the new library card, they have a
Yeah,
picture.
no,
Is that a personal ID?
that's a city ID, and it wouldn't constitute one of the acceptable 7. So that wouldn't work for elections. For vote. That's more for city services. And then
School ID, no?
no, the reason why a school ID wouldn't work is because it doesn't have an address on it. So instead, we need an address on it. And then there are supporting forms of ID for those folks that have a reasonable impediment as to obtaining one of those 7. And that's a kind of a longer list, but it includes maybe like a bank statement, or it includes like VA documents as well for our military. So that one's a little bit more detailed, but you could get a whole list on our website if you can.
So the IDs that are acceptable are, there's a background, let's say, it was checked prior.
By the Secretary of State.
Whether it's secretary or federal or
Yes.
vital
records.
Viral
Yeah.
records.
Yeah, it has to have been, yeah, I guess filtered out by SOS. They're the ones that determine what those IDs are. And the same IDs here apply in every other county in the state. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I've started getting emails saying that they see that I'm not registered, or, you know, my husband and I have usually done the mail-in
Mail,
form. Is there like a number I need to be calling to find out if I'm going to get my ballot by mail?
Yes, of course. So our number is I don't bring cards, but yeah, our number is 546-2154.
Okay. Does anybody have a pen?
Can you repeat that?
915-546-2154.
And it's just a matter of calling and asking?
Yeah, and you know, you're not the first one or the last one. Lots of people right now are getting those same texts.
Yeah, and I'm not going to open that because.
But I
yeah.
tell people all the time, whatever message you get, just call our office.
Okay.
Because I don't know who sent you. We don't send text messages.
Okay.
The only correspondence we would send you is correspondence that you
Okay.
requested.
And the other thing too, voting by mail, so it seems like we're voting early,
Yeah.
and that by the time election day comes around, there's a whole bunch of information on each one of the candidates that comes out after we've had to turn in our ballot. So, and it would be really nice if the entities, whomever, the TV, the newspaper, you know, all those guys, could get it together a little earlier so that the first group who's voting has, because they kind of nailed it down right before election day, so the information is more specific and more palatable, you know, as you're going through it. But that's just a suggestion.
One huge advantage of voting by mail is that you get to sit with the ballot for a while and
Yeah.
look at it and do that research part, that second R on your own time. But it is kind of, the one disadvantage would be that you send out your mail, you're done, and then here
Yeah.
comes the bombshell thing about
Right,
turning it in.
right,
So
yeah.
unfortunately, that's the way, by law, we have to send those 21 days prior to the election.
Uh-huh.
So that's why you get them early. But you have the option of turning it in the very day of elections, if you wish.
Oh, really?
But you have to bring it in personally
Okay.
to our office, so
okay.
it's no longer by mail. But there's a drop box at the county courthouse where you could physically bring it in the last day of elections. But you know,
Okay.
we don't. People, the whole point of voting by mail is to drop it in a mailbox.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, it's a bit of a. That's kind of one of the drawbacks.
Okay.
There's very few voting by mail. It's very convenient. But
It
that'll
is.
be one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
How do people volunteer to help with elections, like actually work?
Yeah. So there's somebody at our office. Her name's Brenda, who handles poll worker recruitment. And then, you know, when I introduced myself, I forgot to mention that I'm the training coordinator. So I train all the poll workers, and we're getting ready to start our poll worker trainings. We host our trainings. Well, actually, the Sheriff's Academy lets us borrow their training rooms, and we're going to train upwards of 600 people for the election because it's 116 locations, and each one has 4 or 6, depending on how busy they are. So we definitely need people, right? And hiccups happen, people drop out the last minute. So we always need not only the main list, but kind of like a secondary list of people that we can call. So if you are interested or you know someone, I would suggest to call the office, ask for Brenda, and she could get you the right paperwork, the right forms, in order to be one of our poll workers. I'm always excited to have more because we need more, right? And especially younger folks, we have a student clerk application where young folks get an opportunity not only to make some money, but it's on a Tuesday, so they get to miss class too, right? And they're always happy about that. And then it's tax-free money that they make. And then we get to bring them into the process, the electoral process, and they get to be a little bit more civically engaged. I did that when I was in high school. I was a poll worker, and then, you know, it kind of sparked that interest to become an elections official, which I am now. So I always kind of tell young kids that. And then our older poll workers love having young folks at the vote centers because they get to have help, right? Bring me that over there, can you please pick that up for me, right? Things like that. So it's a mix of young and older folks, and that's kind of what makes a great polling location. But yeah, I would suggest if you are interested or know someone, just call our office. They could get you the right paperwork. And then now I think we're locked in for this upcoming election already because we start our poll workers training in 2 weeks. But we always need the next election, right? We're always kind of looking forward to the next one also. So yeah, call our office. Any more questions, guys? Yes.
We can bring a scratch paper, right, to like.
Ooh, great
Yeah.
question. Great question. So devices are not allowed, right? So especially this is especially a problem for our young folks that want to take a selfie at the machine, right? But devices are not allowed. Any device that can record either image or audio is not allowed, but written material is. So please write it because it's a long one. I don't want you guys to get there and have it be the first time you're looking at these names or these propositions, because it slows the process for the next person, right? So when you go vote, take a piece of paper, or you can print your personalized ballot if you can, and then that way you're just kind of filling in your choices already. And that's one thing that's very convenient about voting by mail, that you sat in your living room or in your dining room and you went through each one, you have all the time. But when you go vote, definitely write down your choices. That's good. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, ma'am.
I want to mention that I'm aware of, on the ballot this upcoming time, we have a lot of big bond-related
Yes,
things.
Yes, ma'am.
And for the hospitals, for the education, for all kinds of subsets.
Yeah.
And those things are also broken down like 4 or 5 items within.
Yeah.
And that's like, I may have to decide, do I want better hospital services versus EPISD bond things as a taxpayer? And all of that takes time. So it's, the League of Women Voters puts out a guide that is very useful and trustworthy. And there are other sources of information.
Yeah, my suggestion, yes.
This presidential election is going to be a heavy voter turnout, and the city of El Paso has lots of items on. So it ain't easy this particular time.
Yeah, and that is kind of part of what we put onto the voter. We prepare everything for you guys, right? Locations, times, dates, all that. But what we can do for you is have you guys look at the ballot. So the more informed our voters are, the better. That way you can make the right choice, right? So yeah, there are plenty of bond propositions, some city propositions, some from the county, some from the city. But definitely do your homework on those. So that when you get to vote, because some of the language can be a little bit hard to understand, so you want to just read it, process it, and then make your choice, right? But yeah, there's a famous writer, author, Toni Morrison, right? Who said voting is like a little prayer, right? You go in and you make your little prayer, and you don't have to tell anyone, right? It's secret and it's private and it's independent. So based on that, you could vote for those bond propositions or whatever candidate as you wish. We just want you to vote. That's our main priority. How you do it, when you do it, where you do it, is entirely your choice. Any other questions, guys? So yeah, let me just repeat the main point here. Early voting, October 21st through November 1st. Take your ID, one of those 7 that we mentioned. And if you wish to vote election day, 7 a.m., 7 p.m. And we have 116 voting locations, early voting. And El Paso has 517,000 registered voters. And even 1% is 5,000 voters. And it makes a big difference in any race. So we are aware that voter turnout isn't going to increase, tenfold from one election to the next, but even incremental change for us is a win, right? So yesterday happened to be National Voter Registration Day. I went to UTEP, I brought back 113 applications. So that's now 100 people that weren't part of the electorate that now have become that. So, we're in it for the long haul, so incremental change to us is how it's done and how it's going to be. So thank you again for hosting us. Thank you. So, yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Mr. And now a word from Joseph Longo.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Longo, and I'm a volunteer here at the McGoffin Home. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's not going to be a mini lecture, so I'm going to try not to be too long, but I'm going to talk a little bit about women suffrage, how women got the right to vote here in El Paso, particularly. So, Mildred Baker was one of many El Paso women who fought for the right to vote. She was a suffragette here in the 1900s and 1920s, and she lived to be 109 years old.
Wow.
She died in 1994. And she lived long enough, this was in 1991, to witness the first woman mayor, county judge, state senator, and district judge here in El Paso. And at that time, almost all the high elected office, with the exception of the congressional representative, were held by women. So this is a quote from the El Paso Times that she said, "I campaigned up and down the county trying to get the men to give women the right to vote," she explained. "Most of them told me if women got the right to vote, they would end up voting the way their husband told them to." She believed that significant political changes were happening for women at the time. And she was grateful that she lived long enough to see her work as a suffragette bear fruit. She and other suffragists believed voting would give women the political power to enact significant changes. She might have been ridiculed for her ideas and work while she was a suffragette, but when she would die, she was hailed as a voting pioneer. So on August 18th, 1920, El Paso women celebrated the passage of the 19th Amendment by planning a big parade. Mrs. Anzina de Gaulle furnished her car with white and gold, and Mayor Charles Davis offered to bring a big band to Cleveland Square. In 1975, Elise Davis from the El Paso Herald-Post wrote an article interviewing several El Paso women about their memories in 1920 when they first got the right to vote. One of them, Alberta Lundgren, who later became an environmental activist here in El Paso, said that it meant something to her to have the freedom to express themselves, just along with her sister, also was saying this, and for women to have the right to vote and the right to make the difference was also something that was very important to them. And they felt that it had made a difference in improving the status of women. Another one, Sister Leonora Redmond from Loretto, remembered, she was a young school teacher and remembered running across the street to the drugstore to vote, but did not remember who she voted for. And they remembered a lot of the argument at that time was that if women got the right to vote, that they would vote exactly how the men would vote, because they didn't have the minds to be independent. But she did not, she said that she did not do it like that. And she felt happy and free. And other women, such as Elizabeth Kelly, who was librarian director at the El Paso Library for a long time, was also said the fact she heard the argument, but when she voted, she didn't let that bother her. So being allowed to vote gave these women the feel that they have the freedom to make their voices heard, and that they could have an impact on society. Now, Texas became the 9th state to ratify, the first southern state to ratify the 19th Amendment on June 28, 1919. And compared to the suffrage movement in Texas, it was perhaps the most progressive of all the southern states. And El Paso, of course, women played a big part in that as well. Now, women in Texas was also given the right to vote in the primaries in 1918. So, according to another early suffragette, A. Louise Dietrich, who is a pioneer nurse, the majority of women are agreed that we no longer need politicians but statesmen. The right to vote at the primaries is a power women should not overlook, and all women must register. We can choose men who have stood for what women have worked for all these years, or else the sort that goes along the same old lines. Mrs. R.O. Chapman, one of the deputy registrar of the county register who registered voters, was the first woman reportedly to vote. Registered to vote. The first woman to vote was actually an anti-suffragette. And she believed, she said, we're voting, women are just going to vote the way their husbands are. Now, before, it's also important to talk a little bit about the legal status of women. Before women got the right to vote, in the early days, a married woman was allowed to retain ownership of her own property. And they were entitled to share equally with her husband any wealth or property earned during the marriage, and could make her own will, such as our very own Octavia McGoffin did. And we have a copy of her will upstairs, leaving her separate property or her share of community property to whoever she chose. Single women had a little bit more freedom. Single women or widows, they could make contracts, sue or be sued, choose her own home, own property, retain custody of her children. But women's rights were circumscribed by her marriage. And women's legal rights were based on not the reality of frontier life or the English common law, but Spanish law, because Texas was part of Mexico. Now, during the late 19th century and early 20th century, El Paso women founded public and political voices as activists. They fought to enact important social reforms in various areas, including education, public safety, health, and welfare. They also fought for suffrage, prohibition, and other reform issues. But at that time, it was not acceptable for women to have a public role. They belonged in the home. The issue of temperance was also an important issue that mobilized women in the public world, especially in Texas. To counter this, that they didn't belong in the public realm, women activists argued that they needed to go out to the community to address important social issues, to preserve their home and families. But they came to realize that they needed the vote to enact these changes, and just convincing the men to vote was not enough. In the El Paso Herald Post on June 9, 1912, Olga Kohlberg said suffrage would evaluate the country. And in 1913, at an El Paso Women Club meeting, President Kathleen Foster said she believes suffrage was invariable, it was going to happen. That same year, on May 8th, Mrs. Sims, a club woman from Bryan, Texas, and suffragette, spoke in favor of suffrage and predicted that a suffrage club would be organized in El Paso. In 1915, on January 12th, at Hotel Orndorff, and now it's Hotel Cortez, the first suffrage league, El Paso Equal Franchise League, which was a chapter of the State League, was organized with Anzina Orndorff as the first president. Now the organization was mostly made up 100% of white women, mostly middle class, older women. But the woman who organized it was Ruth Auger, who was a young artist and registered at Texas at the College of the Mind, later UTEP, and she sort of made of what at that time the new woman. They waited longer to get married, they worked. So she organized the league. And so the Equal Franchise League, they held parliamentary drills, they studied the government, they had relationships with prominent suffrage leaders, national, state, and local community and political leaders. But then they realized they needed to do more with the community. So they were active with not just financially supporting the Crowcroft, the baby sanatorium in New Mexico, but they mandated it. They also held a public debate at the El Paso courthouse where they got a speaker pro-suffrage and a speaker anti-suffrage. So they were involved in other various organizations, including creating a city foundation of women clubs, working with other organizations. So what unique about the women's suffrage movement was here in El Paso was that African American women worked alongside white women suffragettes. One of the leaders was Maud Sampson, who was the first president of the Colored Women Progressive Club of El Paso on December 12, 1918. And they, on election day, did register to vote with little trouble. And they organized for political candidates. They had support of white suffragettes. But when Mrs. Sampson decided that she was an auxiliary member of the local league, but when she wanted to become a member auxiliary of the National Women's Suffrage Organization, that was a different story because you had to apply to the state. So the National said you have to apply to the state. Of course, the state in Texas at that time, and they were, had discrimination, they were racist. And they did not want, so they deflected it. They went to Carrie Chapman Catt, the national suffragette, and she told them, well, I would probably do the same thing, but tell her to stop, tell her to don't embarrass the movement, because they naively assume that, all women are going to get the right to vote and everything going to be solved. But of course, even though women got the right to vote, not all women, women of color, African American women, Latinas, Asian women still face difficulties, barriers, poll taxing, legislative tests. In the 1960s, wasn't when they passed the Civil Rights Act, really the first step where you have universal voting. In Liberia, when we moved, the poll tax was abolished for federal election in '64, and then the state in '66, because they were still using it in state elections. And even in the 1930s, LULAC in 1933 had been a local chapter was organized, and then you had the local organization of women, and they were active in the 30, 50, registering voter, paying poll tax. Because the poll tax, I believe, was $1 and maybe 50 cents, something like that. But that was at that time, that cost like a lot of wages. It took a lot of money out of people's pockets. So it was a lot for people, including some of my relatives as well. So it was a lot. So another thing is Native American women, they played a big part in the suffrage movement. They inspired the suffrage movement. It wasn't citizens, so they couldn't vote. It wasn't until 1924, but technically they couldn't vote. They were still blocked from voting until maybe the 50s because there was a whole issue about them living on reservations. Another thing I want to do before I end is that many of you probably heard of Albert Fountain, who was a leader in the Salt War. Well, he put forth the first legislation in the Texas, I might be wrong about this, but I'm confident I'm not, about that would ask for women's suffrage in 1873 from El Paso. So El Paso had played a big role. Now, specifically, I want to also briefly talk about Latina women. There was talk among the Equal Franchise League about organizing a branch for Latina women since El Paso was broadly Hispanic, but that never came to pass. There were some Hispanic women who did attend events, but when women did get the right to vote, they were barrier, like the poll tax, the legislative test, even on election day in 1918, some Latina were turned away because of the language difficulties. And that still was an issue. In 1975, they extended the Civil Rights Act to go after language discrimination. So you couldn't discriminate based on language anymore. And not to say Latinas here were still active around that time. While white women, Anglo women, were campaigning for women's suffrage, there were some Hispanic women who were campaigning in the laundry strike, laundry women's strike in 1919. So thank you, and thank you guys.
And to bring it all together is Miss Eva Ross with Hope Rising. Thank you.
I'm gonna be more informal than the previous speakers. And one of the things I have in common with Joseph and various staff here is a profound interest in El Paso women's history in particular. And I want you to know that Joseph has a wonderful timeline that you could pump for a gazillion facts. And then we also have a thing, it's under open educational resources. It's El Paso Women A to Z. And many of the women scientists, doctors, teachers, Miss Kelly, everybody, they're all on that list, and we keep adding to it as fast as we can. I stand before you hopeful. I put money where my mouth is. I'm going to kind of take my personal history and try to say it as fast as I can as an El Paso woman in this, wonderful borderland that we live in. And I'm going to be 78 in December. So one of my earliest political memories is my dad taking me to the downtown plaza, and Kennedy had arrived as a candidate. And there was, of course the plaza was Yemo. And so, but, my family is a talking political family. Everybody is very much a voter. I have a brother who's going to be an election judge in Houston, and he has to deal with keeping everybody calm, with or without weapons, through the process of the election. Because, hey, it's a right, and we're respecting it. That is a memory, and I went to Loretto, and as a El Paso Catholic, the U.S. Catholics were all excited about Kennedy. Went to UTEP. I got a teaching job in Isleta, and really our rights were very limited in the late 70s. Access to contractual things and credit cards and banking. I'm very proud to sign my own name on my own checks now, but it was not always like that, and rights come and go all the way to the Supreme Court, and then a different decision is made, and politics change, and new things have to develop, and so you have to hold on to hope as part of our tradition, I suspect. Anyway, I got involved with the El Paso Women's Political Caucus, and we've only had one El Paso female mayor, Susie Azar, and that's on the timeline. And her political career, step by step, from being a city rep and then the mayor, and there was much excitement around her. Hey, it'll all break through, and things will change a whole lot. What has changed, if you really look when you elect, when you go to the polls, smart Hispanic female women realized that they could have significant roles and power as judges. And I think close to 50% of El Paso female judges happen to be female. You can tabulate it and, double check, because things shift around some. Things are always shifting, and we have to keep our papers correct and get our como se llamas out. And then I guess I got together with the El Paso Women's Political Caucus 40 years later, and we're actually in the Handbook of Texas, one of the few local chapters described, because I wanted it documented in an official, highly recognized resource. And so I'm going to get my como se llama to the polls. I'm going to go early. I normally end up at the UTEP booth. I really am concerned maybe all of the actions of movie stars and prominent people at all levels. Maybe we're just gonna have a rush, a thundering horde come November the 5th across our nation. And I personally intend to be up however late it is and watch it as late as I can. And we're going to have a family reunion in Houston on the 8th of November. And I have many relatives who are of a different opinion than I am. And they say, we know how you are, Eva. And I say, I know how you are. And we can still have a reunion. And that's kind of how we end up, you know, having a country and having a city and having the McGoffin House. It takes more than cakes to make a country. It takes more than persistence. It's like, hey, can't we just leave it the way we voted for last time? It doesn't happen like that. We have a living, breathing, civic government. And I'm hoping that there's an army of people under the age of 40 that just astonish the nation. And that will change things. And that's all I know for now.
Thank you.